Since the viewers of this channel are sports fans, I want you to imagine something. Picture yourself sitting in the stands as a spectator watching your favorite sport when effectively out of nowhere, you are asked to step in and play in the actual game. It's the stuff out of schoolyard fantasy. Surely this doesn't happen in real life, right? Well, it happened, and it happened not so long ago. And for 42-year-old David Ayres, the schoolyard fantasy came true. Let's dive into this impossible story. Who is David Ayres? He was born on August 12, 1977 in the town of Whitby, Ontario, Canada, which is about 45 minutes outside of downtown Toronto by car. Like pretty much every young boy born and raised in Canada in the 1970s, he was nuts about ice hockey, so it was no surprise that he played a ton. David ended up becoming a goaltender, which was a bit of a family tradition as both his father and his brother were also goaltenders. But like a lot of young guys in Canada, his dream of playing professional hockey was just that, a dream. He was good, no question there, but in a country loaded with great hockey players, probability indicated that it just wasn't going to become a career for him. Any aspirations of playing hockey professionally went even further out the window when, in his 20s, he became sufficiently sick that he eventually required a kidney transplant. This was in 2004. The kidney was donated by his mother, and fortunately, everything went okay and allowed David to recover, but the concept of being a professional athlete was about as distant an idea as you can get. But that didn't mean he couldn't still make a job out of hockey, the game that he loved more than anything. And so his focus became earning some sort of livelihood from the game. His career in hockey. Despite the kidney transplant, it's worth mentioning that he did try one last go as a player. In 2014-2015, he played 8 games as goalie for the Norwood Vipers of the Allen Cup Hockey League. This is about as junior that junior hockey can get, and unfortunately, it did not go well for David. He gave up 58 goals in those 8 games, which is a lot. He finished with a record of 0-8, never registering a win, and he had a .777 save percentage, which is eye-wateringly dismal. But in time, he ended up working as a building operator at what was then called Ricoh Coliseum, which has since been renamed Coca-Cola Coliseum. This is in downtown Toronto, and the arena is home to the Toronto Marlies, who are an affiliate of perhaps the most famous hockey franchise in the world, the NHL's Toronto Maple Leafs. The Marlies are just one step below the Maple Leafs, and so this was no mere minor league squad. This was as close to the show as Ayres was likely going to get, or so he thought. His job responsibilities were quite varied, including maintenance in and around the facility and occasionally operating an ice resurfacer, better known by the brand name Zamboni. This is honestly more than a bit of fun to drive. I mean, just look at this thing. But while not glamorous by any stretch of the imagination, Ayres was still working in hockey as part of a storied franchise with a long and proud tradition. And as it turns out, his background as a goalie ended up being quite useful for a little time on the ice too. At some point, the equipment manager for the Toronto Marlies found out that Ayres had a background in hockey as a goaltender, and he passed this information up the food chain, eventually landing with a guy named Sheldon Keefe. At the time, Keefe was the head coach of the Toronto Marlies, and he'd actually eventually go on to coach the Maple Leafs, so this dude was well placed. When Keefe found out that Ayres used to be a goalie, he started asking him to participate in practices for the Marlies when an extra goalie was needed. This happens more often than you might think, and it's not uncommon for non-pros to be used in hockey practices. So as you can imagine, Ayres was ecstatic and happily participated. Once word of a free practice goalie available to the Marlies got around, Ayres ended up in the practices for the Maple Leafs as well. So here he was, the aging recipient of a kidney transplant, sharing the ice with some of the world's best hockey players. For Ayres, it must have felt like a dream had finally come true, but things were about to take a turn for the surreal. The game. The date is February 22nd, 2020, literally right before the NHL and the world as a whole shut down due to COVID-19. The Carolina Hurricanes were in Toronto for a road game against the Maple Leafs, and as an employee of the home team and a fairly active participant in the squad itself, Ayres and his wife were up in the stands watching the game. Now, a little needs to be explained here about the structure of NHL hockey teams for those not familiar. Most professional hockey teams will have 2 goalies available for a game, a starter and a backup. Since the goaltender is so massively important in hockey, you don't want to be without a goalie, so having a backup obviously makes sense. The starting goalie for the Carolina Hurricanes that night was James Reimer, who himself was a former Toronto Maple Leaf. But as fate would have it, Reimer would go down with an injury early in the game, so backup goalie Peter Mrazek entered the game. Since Carolina was on the road and not in their own backyard, Mrazek was their only goalie now, and in the unlikely event that Mrazek himself got hurt and couldn't continue playing the game, a final last resort option was needed. So the Maple Leafs offered up their 42-year-old maintenance guy, just in case. After getting the shoulder tap of a lifetime, Ayres headed down under the rink to get suited up on the 1,000,000-to-1 chance that he was needed. But midway through the second period, still not fully dressed, his phone started blowing up. They were all saying the same thing. Mrazek had been hurt in a super scary collision with Toronto forward Kyle Clifford and was down on the ice. Someone came barreling down to find him, told him to hurry up because he might actually be going in the game. And indeed, he was going in. Mrazek couldn't continue. So Ayres signed a one-game NHL contract there in the bowels of Scotiabank Arena. He finished dressing and he skated out into infamy. Now, I cannot possibly imagine what that moment must have been like for David Ayres. But because this happened so recently in such a public forum, we at least have the video so we can watch it. It is unbelievable in hindsight to watch him skate out on the ice, wearing a helmet with the telltale blue and white of Toronto, and start warming up for Carolina. His heart must have been pounding, his mind swirling, the adrenaline levels must have been through the roof. The Carolina players came up and gave him a little tap on the pads as the game got started, and they must have said a few words like, "Try not to crap your pants." He entered the game a little over 11 minutes through the second period, meaning there was still an entire half a game left to play. Carolina was actually winning 3-1 at the time, but when you have an emergency goalie in the net who had been in the stands with his wife like an hour earlier, that lead probably didn't feel very safe at all. And what started as a dream for Ayres quickly turned into a nightmare. He gave up a goal for the Maple Leafs on the very first shot he faced. Then he allowed another goal on the second shot he faced. This must have felt like the Norwood Vipers all over again, but now it was in front of the entire hockey world. But then the skies cleared, the clouds parted, and it all came together for him. The Carolina team skating in front of him entered lockdown mode, and they put on a defensive performance for the remainder of the game. They completely controlled the third period, scoring 3 more goals of their own. They managed puck possession as much as possible, and they did their best to keep the puck as far away from their goalie as they could. And when he was called upon, Ayres stepped up. He stopped every single shot he faced after allowing those first 2 goals. In the end, somehow, Carolina won the game by a final score of 6-3. At 42 years, 194 days, he became the oldest goalie to win his NHL regular season debut, beating the previous record that had been set way back in 1927. He was named the first star of the game, coming out for a curtain call where the Toronto fans, freshly defeated by their part-time Zamboni driver, gave him a standing ovation. The boy from Whitby had reached the pinnacle of the hockey world, though certainly not in a way he could have ever imagined. That's the video for today, everyone. Let me know what you think of this remarkable story in the comments below. And by the way, the next time you go watch your favorite team play, just remember it's never a 0% chance that you won't be called to get in there, so be ready. Talk soon, friends.